Hari Om, everyone. I'll say Om 3 times, followed by an invocation shlok. Om. 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 Om Sadashiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmad Acharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Oh. Some of the questions I had are very similar to questions some of you had. How did this world come into existence? Are we being controlled? Is there free will? What is the purpose of life? Kaboom! I had to use this word kaboom because a dear friend of mine, whenever he has an aha moment, he says kaboom. And this was one of the biggest aha moment that I had during Gita. One concept answered most of my questions. Gunaha guneshu vartante. It translates as it's all an interplay between the gunas, for the gunas, of the gunas, by the gunas. So, what are these gunas? These gunas are behind everything we see, everything we perceive, everything we feel. They are the DNA of the universe. They are the building blocks of the universe. And there are three gunas: sattva, rajas, and tamas. You can also think about them as being the tendencies or the qualities. The sattva qualities include clarity, peace, calmness, knowledge, intelligence, harmony, contentment, light. Rajas qualities include activity, ambition, arrogance, anxiety, even the feelings of jealousy, pride. And tamas qualities include ignorance, inactivity, darkness, anger, dullness, laziness, confusion, sleep. So I thought of putting them in a table form, and I'll focus on the first line and the last line. These gunas are so subtle, so I was thinking how to represent them, and I thought of using wave function. Sattva can be represented by a very simple wave function where the amplitude and the frequency is constant, and it's a harmonious function, very predictable. Sattva is represented by white color. The rajas function is where either the amplitude is changing or the frequency is changing or some combination of that. It represents a change and hence some activity. Interestingly, this is also a wave function, even though it may appear like a picture. If you look at it, it doesn't seem to be going anywhere. It represents chaos. It represents confusion. And the color of tamas is black. I wanted to bring your attention to the last line. Sattva has revealing power, rajas has projecting power, and tamas has veiling power. If you have to take an example, suppose we take a pen. When you are in sattva gun and you have a pen, you will acknowledge the pen, you will know the pen, you will know the uses of the pen, you may even admire the beauty of the pen and have some gratitude for the pen. That is sattva. When you are in rajas, you'll actually use the pen to write. So that's an activity. But it also has projecting power. So suppose this pen was handed over to you by a stranger. Your imagination may go and say, is there some ulterior motive behind giving me this pen? You know, is there to take fingerprints or is there a recorder in it? So it tries to imagine and project what it is not. It may be just a simple pen. And then the thumbs is where you don't acknowledge the pen. Suppose somebody comes with a paper to sign, you'll actually pick up the pen, sign, and return the pen without even acknowledging that the pen was an important part in signing the pen, in signing the paper. So you're almost unaware of the pen. The sattva and tamas may sometimes be confusing because both of them don't involve any activity. Sattva is clarity and calmness, whereas tamas is dullness and confusion. So let's get on to the questions I had listed. How does this world come into existence? Before the creation, these three gunas are in equilibrium. By equilibrium, I don't mean to say that they're stable, because it is the inherent qualities of these gunas that they keep changing from one another. Then what is equilibrium? That they are equal and opposite to each other. Sattva opposes rajas and tamas, rajas opposes sattva and tamas opposes sattva and rajas. So they are canceling each other out and they are in equal and opposite force. Then as I had mentioned that sattva and tamas, they don't do anything, but the rajas, there is some activity going on. So you can think of it as that the acceleration is accelerating. So it begins to overpower the sattva and the tamas a little bit, and it creates ripples. And that is what I'm trying to show in this out of balance, that ripples are getting created. These ripples lead to creation of 5 subtle elements. The 5 subtle elements are space, air, fire, water, earth. As you move from here to here, it becomes more and more denser. And the more subtle the element is, it is more abundant. So how does it work? When the ripples begin to create, initially, the first element is primarily rajas. And when I say primarily sattva, when I say primarily sattva, any of these gunas cannot exist in isolation. It just means that sattva is the primary and the other two are very, very minimal. So the akash is created, which is primarily sattva. Little rajas gets added and creates air. Then rajas increases a little more, and then the fire is created. Then tamas creeps in and water is created, and earth is primarily tamas. During the creation process, when space is created, 1/10 of it gets converted into air, 1/10 of air gets converted into fire, and so on. The attribute of space is sound. The attribute of air is sound plus touch. Attribute of fire is sound plus touch plus form. Attribute of water adds taste, and earth finally adds the smell. But remember, these are still very subtle elements and you cannot perceive them. And then there's a process to combine them in particular proportion to create matter and space that we can perceive. And as I said, the gunas are constantly changing. So there's a particular state of matter and space, and then it changes into a second state. So that creates perception of time. And from this matter and space, stars, planets, atoms, and quarks are created. So I'm just trying to represent that something very big as heavenly bodies to small atoms and quarks. The matter then goes on to create our bodies and the nature around us, the mountains, rivers, trees, plants, animals, birds, reptiles. What I wanted to highlight here, because till now it almost appears like a Big Bang theory, which I'm trying to explain. So, what is different? Even the mind, the memories, the intellect, the feelings, the thoughts, ideas, and emotions, these are also created by these five subtle elements. And the gunas, the three gunas, can be combined in infinite combinations, and hence we see the variety. Even if you take a particular feeling because of different combination, say for example, anger, it could be a mild anger or it can be a very intense anger. So this is how the world came into existence. The second question I had was, are we being controlled? Are we being some puppets in somebody's hands? So before answering that question, let's look at action. Action has three effects. The first one is quite normal to understand, which is the physical output. Say, let's take an example of driving. When you do the action of driving, the physical output is that you go from one location to another. The second one is the psychological effect of it. Remember, when you start driving, it's overwhelming. You have to look at the dashboard, you have to look at the rear view mirror, you have to notice the traffic lights. You know, if it's night, you have to switch on the light, etc., etc. And it's quite overwhelming. But as we practice and as time passes, it becomes muscle memory. Similarly, when we do any action, it begins to create tendencies which are etched in our mind. Because of this repetition, there are likes and dislikes which are created. The desires are created. So that is also an effect of the actions we do. The third one is the cosmic effect, where merit and demerit are credited into our account. What are merit and demerits? Is the pap and punya. So it's not so much about the activity itself, but it is the intention behind the activity which creates pap and punya. So, why am I explaining all this? What we are today, what tendencies we have, is because of our past actions. And what we do today will define how our later life is going to be, how our future lives are going to be. So, if you see these psychological tendencies, and I mentioned that it leads to desires, at the time of death, if there are unfulfilled desires, and based upon the tendencies, it is decided what form we take in the next birth to fulfill those unfulfilled desires. And what will be the destiny of that is decided by the pap and punya we do. So, no, we are not controlled by anybody. We are responsible for our own destiny. The next question was, is there free will? And that's an interesting one. What is a free will? Free will can be said that you have various options and you choose one. But if you look deeper into it, how are the options presented? The options are presented, one, because of the destiny, the pap and punya we have done in the past, and also what the state of mind is in at particular time. And then how do we decide an option? The mind and intellect, it's almost like an AI program. So based upon the tendencies, it feels whatever is most appropriate, chooses that option, and the AI program learns with it. It's almost like machine learning. So in fact, if I have to say, this body is actually slave to the mind and intellect, which are making the decisions. So I would think there's no absolute free will. It is all an interplay of gunas. The last question in my list was, what is the purpose of life? I'm not going to give a very philosophical answer to it. What is life? It's actually just a cycle of birth and death. And as we saw in the previous one, the activities that we do, they're also a result of different interplay of gunas, and they decide the next birth, and the cycle just continues. If the mind decides that I don't want to be confronted with things, then maybe the mind can decide to be in sattva. It can actually make all the activities sattvic, so it can convert the rajas into sattvic rajas. Even tamas can be useful. You can be unaware of others' faults. So that will make your life peaceful and happier in this particular life and the future lives. But the purpose of life is for this interplay of gunas to just continue forever. Then where is the problem? So far, whatever we spoke about is just happening between the gunas. It's all an interplay between the gunas. Let's take a step back. Whatever I described so far is universe. If I have to categorize this universe into two simple categories, I can say that it can be split into known universe and unknown universe. And by unknown universe, I also include the universe which is yet to be manifested. Does that encompass everything about the universe and everything that you can think about? Actually, it leaves one thing, the knower. So if I take myself, there's an I to which this known universe and the unknown universe is appearing. And remember that I doesn't even include the mind and the body because that's all part of the known universe. So then where is the problem? So what happens, there's a Sanskrit word called tadatmya. In Hindi, it's like इसके धर्म दूसरे में आ जाएं और दूसरे के धर्म पहले में आ जाएं तो उनमें तादात्म्य है. So it's almost like superimposition. So what happens when the body is walking, this I says, I am walking. This knower says, knower is walking. When the mind is thinking, it says the mind is the I am thinking. So on and so forth. But remember, there are three principles between the knower and the known, or the seer and the seen. The seer and seen are always different. There is no relationship between them because the eyes, they cannot see themselves. Even when they look into the mirror, they only see the reflection. The seer is one, seen are many. The seer is constant, the seen is changing. So as long as there's no relationship between them and there is a clear understanding, there is no problem. But once this superimposition happens, this I feels I'm in the middle of all this interplay of gunas and it starts associating with everything and gets impacted by that. And that is where the problem begins. This is where I wanted to bring everything together of so far, whatever we've discussed. So there's a witness, and this side is the known and unknown universe. The mind is very sattvic. That's why it has the revealing power. It reveals the world to us. So that's where the sattvic mind comes into play. But because over a period of time, it has lost the purity of the sattvic nature, it has some tamas. And that tamas plus sattva creates a veil. Now, this veil is not 100% tamasic, otherwise it'll be a concrete wall, and then the superimposition between this side and that side cannot happen. So it's very transparent so that they are having that superimposition, but it is clouded. And then the Rajas comes into play and projects this universe. So now, if you think of Gita and you think of this mind as Arjun, Arjun is in the middle of the war thinking about all the suffering and the pain that is to come. And this is the person who has all the knots and is hooked. So he asks Krishna, what should he do? So Krishnaji tells him, now, first he tells him about the separateness of these two, that there is an Atman, the self, the witness, the knower, which is not affected by anything, and this is just an instrument. But Arjun says, I don't see it, so what should I do? Then Krishna goes to explain, but now that you have this vivek of real and unreal, the self and rest of the universe, you should be able to engage in selfless activity because you are not the self here. And any activity you do, you can do for the benefit of a wider good. Also, because you understand that the actions you take, the, the state in which your mind is at the time of doing it, the results will be pap or punya, but they are of just this mind and they don't impact your real self. So you can actually just ignore, not ignore, but whatever result comes in, you can accept it because you understand how that equation is working. It's not your just current effort which is bringing about the outcome, but it has also other components um, like the pap and punya and destiny that's deciding the result. But then Arjun says, okay, so so I do karma yoga. That'll sort of clarify my mind. But then what else? I still don't see this I. So then Sri Krishna says that your mind is scattered. Why is my mind scattered? Because of these sense organs that we have, we are continuously bombarded by these external stimuli, and the mind keeps jumping from one to another. So he suggested, why don't you try Dhyana Yoga, meditation, where you try to control your thoughts? Arjun thinks for a moment and says, no, cannot, as Singaporeans call it, cannot. It's impossible to control the thoughts. Is there some alternative? Then Sri Krishna goes a step ahead and he says, maybe you can try bhakti. And there he goes on to say that there is a God which is all lovable, all powerful, with all the magical qualities, the vibhutis. It's an ideal person you can think of. You can love that God and you can focus on it. So Arjun tries to then, start focusing the mind, the scattered mind, onto one thing. Then God goes on to say, but that God actually resides in your heart. So Arjun starts turning his mind around to look inside the heart. Also, if you close your eyes and think, where is this I coming from? It actually comes from inside. So when the mind is turned inward, it's actually looking in this direction. And as a result of bhakti, dhyan, and karma yoga, the mind is actually purified. The tamas has reduced, and this is just a very thin veil of sattva. And the rajas has been conquered, so to say, by focusing the mind. So it's not jumping around. But can the mind see the witness? Actually, it cannot, because the seer can never be seen. So Arjun gets a bit disappointed that, all this clarifying the mind and focusing, it still did not help. So then Krishna gets into Jnana Yoga and he tells more about self. Self is existence. So if you take an example of rope and snake, when there is dim light, a rope is mistaken to be a snake. So the reality is rope. The snake, which appears, is actually borrowing that existence from the rope. Similarly, the self is the existence from which everything else borrows existence. Self is consciousness. So everything you see on this side is actually appearing in the awareness of the self. Then, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, sorry, there's something running on my computer. Then, okay. Then, um, so yeah. Now, how do we say that everything happens in the consciousness? Because anything that's happening outside the consciousness will also be outside the existence we spoke about. And anything which is outside of existence is non existent. So everything that happens actually happens in the self awareness. And then self is also bliss because all the suffering is on the right hand side. It is based upon the gunas, it's in the mind, so there's no suffering there. That means that self is pure bliss. And then he says, you do Shravan, Manan, and Nididhyasan on this. That is, you hear it again and again. If there are any doubts, clear them, and then meditate on these to make them from belief to knowing. And then what happens? This little veil that you see will drop. It's almost like going into a movie theater and the movie screen drops. What happens then? The movie stops. So all of this side for a moment will disappear. What remains will be this self. And this is what is known as self realization. And in that moment, this self is freed from this person. The knots created by that superimposition are opened and they are unhooked. And then what happens to this person? Actually, this person becomes a Jivan Mukt because the knot is opened from this side also. So even though it continues to live in this world, it will just enjoy everything. It can enjoy the beauty of it. It can keep serving. It can keep doing anything by knowing that it is not affected by anything at all. And we have covered this part that this is the existence consciousness bliss, and which is the only truth available, and this side is all mithya. I just want to cover one more point, that this side, if you see, there are no gunas, there are no qualities, there are no attributes. All the gunas, qualities, and attributes are here in the interplay of gunas. So the I in me and the I in you cannot be distinguished. Because whenever you distinguish between two things, it has to be separate. It has to have some attribute which is different. But here, nothing is different. And hence, it's the same I in you and the same I in me. I can go to the next slide. Anyway, actually, we can skip the next slide. It was more 5 takeaways. And I think I have covered everything. Um, there was probably just one more thing that I can't even remember. Can I try to stop share and do it again?
Please.
Just let me try if I can get to that. No, it's not.
We can see the first slide though now.
Yeah. Okay. I had some 5 takeaways, but doesn't matter. I think it was mainly that the first one we had covered was more around, I don't know, where is it?
Maybe you might want to just show it without the slideshow mode. Just go to that slide and click on it.
Actually, it's my computer is frozen, but for some reason, that's why I was not sure if you guys can hear me. So I don't think even I can see the slide. But from what I remember, actually, the first point was that our past action decide what our current body is, and our current actions decide what the next body is. And then the second was where I think I did not cover a little bit, that yes, our karmas decide what our current birth will be, but it also decides what is created in this world for us to fulfill our unfulfilled desires. So the entire creation, if you think about it, is actually based upon our karmas. And then it was more around that it is the single I, and I think the last one was it's not, self doesn't exist, it's existence itself. It's not a conscious experience, it's a consciousness itself, and it is not uh, the happiness. It's not happy, but it is the bliss itself. I'll share the slide, that last one. So with that, thank you, everyone. I would like to sincerely thank each and every one of you for being part of this group. I really enjoyed all the discussions, the conversations, and the WhatsApp chat where we shared questions, answers, observations, insights, and different resources. So sincerely wanted to thank each and every one of you. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.